Now on the left-hand side, visuals there coming in from the Shambu border. Both, in fact, both sides are Shambu borders, visuals from Shambu borders, where farmers, many of them are being taken into custody. They are detained by the police. All right, there you have it. Visuals there also showing farmers attempting to forcibly remove those barricades. Remember, there are multiple barricades, in fact, multiple layers of barricades that have been placed all along the Shambu border, just like all other borders in the national capital, aligning the national capital. All borders have multiple barricading, and there's also concrete blocks and bricks placed. That entire area has been fortified, sealed. So really impossible for the farmers to make it through or to cut through that sealed border areas. But it seems like there's force being used now. Tractors being used to push their way through. Farmers trying to forcefully, manually push those barricades aside to make it into the national capital. These images are likely to continue. What's going to happen in a few hours? Will there be an outreach from the government? That really has to be seen, because these visuals are really unsettling at this point. 10 a.m. that it began, it's now been 3 hours or nearly 4 hours, and we see these images becoming a lot more violent and controversial. Will there be any attempt to calm sentiments along the border areas? Will there be any attempt to reach out to the farmers to convince them to withdraw their protests? Will the farmers relent? Well, those are questions that still loom as the farmers and the police continue to clash at our border areas. Delhi's national capital right now seeing chaotic scenes at the borders as farmers adamant that they want a minimum support price law to be implemented. Until then, they will continue with their agitation. They don't mind even facing police gunfire. These are strong words coming in from the farmers. Nearly 200 of the farmer unions who have announced this Delhi Chalo agitation. What we know is that prohibitory orders have been put in place. Section 144 in nearly 15 districts of Haryana has been put in place, forbidding any kind of gathering of more than 5 people. And while that's said, farmers still continue in groups, large groups, trying to push through those barricades, drag away concrete barricades, manually break them down so they could enter the national capital. Shambu border area seems to be the worst affected. The police, of course, using all force to stop them, but farmers too making up their mind to try and push through those barricades by force. We see the farmers of 200 farmers unions who have come together. This is, in fact, a little earlier today, we also saw farmers from Karnataka who were detained at railway stations. All across the country, farmer unions in bits. Largely these farmers come from Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh. But even from southern parts of India, like Karnataka, farmers have come in all the way in trains. They've landed up in the national capital, but were detained at the railway station. So police there doing their checks, thorough checks being carried out by the Delhi police, the Haryana police, various states that align the national capital, where cops are thoroughly checking vehicles to see if there are farmers seated, if they are trying to make their way into the national capital, if there's a bid to thwart security measures in place. The police, of course, keeping a hawk eye. We see those protesters agitating, cops firing tear gas shells, and continued efforts by the police to disperse them have so far failed. It's been 4 hours, nearly 3 hours of constant tear gas shells being fired, but yet the farmers there unrelenting. They haven't budged. They still, in fact, continue to gather in larger numbers, huge groups. Despite Section 144 prohibitory orders in place that bans anything more than 4 people to assemble together as a group, you're seeing hundreds, maybe running up to thousands, farmers there gathering along the Shambu border. I'm showing you specifically visuals of Shambu border. We have multiple border areas, including the Singhu border, the Tikri border, that are all seeing similar scenes. But seems like the Shambu border at this point the worst affected, with many of them now being detained. All the stray farmers who have jumped barricades or tried to push through their way have been quickly detained by the police. On both sides of the border, police presence. But that's not deterred the farmers from continuing their agitation. We see that the farmers there demanding a minimum support price law to come into effect at the earliest. That's one of their key demands, which is the price at which the government purchases crops from the farmers. Now, while they demand that, they have been refused permission to protest in the national capital. In fact, protesters have been stopped off at the border areas, and it's about 216 kilometers away from the actual city limits of Delhi. So it's quite a distance, 216 kilometers away from Delhi, the national capital. That's roughly about 2 hours from the city center. But situation seems yet impacting normal life and regular commoners, citizens there affected by and large by the traffic snarls. Choco-block traffic resulted by this borders being sealed off. So vehicles otherwise which would move through borders have all been blocked off. So we're seeing terrible traffic situation within national capital limits. Even though this protest is happening about 2 hours away from Delhi city limits, it's in the border areas of Shambu border area, Singhu border area, Tikri border area. These are primarily those areas that farmers have landed up, and they're not being allowed to move towards the national capital. Now, one of the key demands of the protesting farmers is MSP. Like I did mention, they are stressing on a price, MSP price, at which the government purchases crops from the farmers, providing them with an assured income for their produce. Many of them claim that weather conditions, uncertainties actually result in huge losses for these farmers. So if the government grants them or promises them a minimum support price, then it would really secure the farmers' life, farmers' families, many of them who've died by suicide because they weren't able to cope. The farmers there believe that this is their right. They're producing food for the country, and a large chunk of the produce comes from this very area, agricultural lands that hail across Punjab, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh. They believe that they are working hard to generate food for the entire country, grow crops, but they're not getting sufficient money in exchange for the crops that they produce. They say that weather conditions, uncertainties, whatever could be the reason, in fact, even during the months of COVID, the entire 2 years, farmers claim that they had huge losses, had to incur huge losses. It literally wipes off their income, and they're now demanding the government to give them a guarantee, whatever the conditions, that the government will give them a certain limited price, a minimum support price to the farmers for the crops that they generate, providing them with an assured income. They want an assured income even if conditions like weather are bad, and even if there's low demand, if people aren't wanting to buy crops, at least the government takes it for a minimum price. So that's an assured income for the farmers, and they demand that the MSP law comes into place. They don't want verbal assurances any longer. They want a legal guarantee for MSP. In fact, the MSP price acts as a safety net for these farmers. They say that this assures them fair price for their crops, particularly during times of market fluctuation or when market price falls below the MSP. At least the MSP assurance there ensures that they are stable. Now, this was the condition with which, at least a verbal promise that came in from the center at that point, in 2021, when they agitated for almost a year. This was a verbal assurance that came in from the center that they will implement the MSP law. An assurance was given. One of the conditions on which farmers decided to withdraw that year-long agitation. But it appears they've come back saying and accusing the government of not living up to the promises that were made. Farmers now demanding strict action against those also responsible for the violence that occurred in Lakhimpur Kheri on 2021 October 3rd. They believe that many farmers were attacked a few leaders from the ruling party were responsible for the death of a few farmers. And Lakhimpur Kheri violence, they believe they still haven't got justice. The victims are still awaiting justice. That's one of the demands also made by these protesting farmers.